Last week, the US Congress denied President Obama the authority he wanted to present legislators with an up or down vote on a trans-Pacific trade deal. In an FT comment article, Harvard economics professor Martin Sandbu argues that unless Congress quickly reverts its position, the US president will be politically hobbled for the rest of his term. Professor Sandbu joins me now via Skype to talk about what the domestic squabbles over trade policy mean for America's global influence. Professor Sandbu, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be with you, Martin.
Your piece is triggered by what is essentially a procedural vote. Congress hasn't turned down the trade deal, but they've maybe thrown a small spanner in the wheels. Aren't you overstating your skepticism a little bit?
If this is reversed and the TPA approval is given to the president, what happened on Friday will be a non-event, historically speaking. It's certainly plausible that could happen. I'll leave it to experts in political mechanics to judge the likelihood. The assertion I made, though, is that if Congress denies the president TPA, it is an event similar in kind, though admittedly not similar in magnitude, to the Senate's denial to Woodrow Wilson a century ago of authorization to enter the League of Nations. Again, in a highly disordered world, an American president had launched a substantial initiative in support of global integration. Other countries took steps they never would have taken in substantial reliance on the American president's bold and forward-looking initiative. When the American president was unable to deliver, matters were pushed back beyond where they had been when the matter started, as nations came to doubt that they could rely on the United States, as idealistic hopes were shattered and were replaced with highly pragmatic and adversarial strategies. As there was a challenge of establishing order in the world after the First World War, there is today a challenge of defining a system in Asia where there are so many fewer institutions than in Europe. TPP was going to be an important part of that. If that is denied, there will be adverse consequences for our economy, but it is not a huge one. What is much more consequential is that the United States, having declared as a major part of its grand strategy a rebalancing towards the Pacific, will be left with no important non-military component.
Professor Sandbu, these are big comparisons you're making about the US's role in at least the hemispheric order, if not the global order. But what the opponents are arguing is that this is a bad deal. Partly it's a secretive deal, but partly it's not really about free trade, but basically about intellectual property protections. What is there actually to gain for the US in the substance of the deal?
I think there has been too much secrecy and too much responsiveness to global corporate interests and insufficient focus on matters of concern to local interests. Nonetheless, the reality is that the American market is essentially open, that this deal will operate to make other markets more open, and that will work to the commercial advantage of the United States, and that will ultimately translate into more jobs. As I explained in the FT 3 months ago, there is a major difference between the economics of trade and the economics of trade agreements. The economics of trade do raise real questions. Global integration does bring more challenges to American workers and almost certainly has exacerbated inequality. But that's not what this agreement is about. our market is already open, and that is not going to change whether this agreement goes up or goes down. What is potentially going to change is the extent of opportunities for American producers in a range of foreign markets.
So not a perfect deal, it sounds like, but one that's important to bring the cause of economic openness further. But in that regard, is it a drawback or an advantage that China is excluded from this deal?
China is able to join this deal if it chooses to do so. I certainly hope that the criteria for this deal are drawn in ways that are the same for all countries. And if China is prepared to accede to the disciplines that Vietnam, for example, has acceded to, then I would certainly hope and expect that China would be permitted to participate in this deal. I am a supporter of this deal, but I am concerned by the rhetoric of those who, in their eagerness to pass this deal, frame it as a device for containing China or threatening and limiting China's influence. I think we all need to figure out how to globally coexist, and the United States and China need to take the lead in that.
Professor Lawrence Summers, thank you very much for joining us.